Welcome everyone, I'm Elleni and I'm joined by my wonderful co-hosts Claudia and Richard. What we hope to do in this session is arm you all, regardless of your experience, with the know-how to configure, deploy and get going with the ArcGIS Field Apps. And some of you may have heard of these field apps before, the key ones on screen now. And if you've come to this session or you're joining us online, you're probably also asking, how do I choose the right field app? And how do I make the right decisions to tailor that app for my organization's needs? Well, we'll be visiting a pretend organization with those same questions and challenges shortly. But our best advice for working efficiently in the field is balancing configuration time with the functionality that each app provides. So for example, ArcGIS QuickCapture, as the name probably suggests, is a very quick app to deploy and get going with. It focuses on a big button style functionality, meaning it's very quick and easy to use, and also users generally require no training to use it. Survey123 offers a form-centric approach to capturing data in the field. Surveys can be configured with things like required fields and questions that dynamically update based on previous answers. And ArcGIS Field Maps just builds upon this functionality even more, offering both a form and a map option for visualizing and collecting data in the field. And what this means is not only can you collect new data, but you can also collect and review existing data and see current and historic information in the context of your local surroundings whilst out on site. And last but not least, Sweet is the field app of choice, designed for both tablet and web for smart editing. Sweet allows you to define your own business rules for editing, which means that you can configure Sweet to dynamically give feedback to users, telling them if they've made a mistake and how they can fix it. So as you can see, you have quite a lot of choice for functionality, and it's important to keep things simple. But for a very complex use case, you may spend more time configuring your apps, and we'll see that process shortly. But if you do spend more time configuring that app, it can pay off if it means your field users can collect data really efficiently and accurately first time in the field. So we're going to bring this to life a little bit and take a journey to Scotland and visit an example organisation managing a nature reserve. And this data from Nature Scot, available on the Living Atlas, shows the boundary of a protected estate that covers around 30,000 hectares. This organisation has a challenge of managing 4 different field teams across mountainous terrains, as well as river plains and various wildlife habitats. They also need to maintain public buildings and facilities within this nature reserve that are open to the public. So as you can probably guess, there's not going to be that much Wi-Fi or mobile signal in this area, but each of the ArcGIS Field apps allows you to take data offline. So we've already checked off one requirement for the organisation. But what about the individual teams? We're going to meet those now. So first, we have our Species Watch team. They typically cover large areas of the nature reserve in a single day, and so they need an app that can keep up with them as they're on the move, capturing species sightings whilst out and about. So this team has decided to use ArcGIS QuickCapture for that simple, quick, big button capture style. Our next group of field users actually contain members of the public, or more specifically, visitors of the nature reserve. So visitors who are passionate about hiking are encouraged to partake in a volunteer survey to capture hazards along hiking paths. And this is a really unique field data capture use case, and one that Survey123 is ideal for. With Survey123, public users don't need to be signed in to publicly shared surveys, and they can still take data offline whilst hiking. The third field team at the Nature Reserve is the Facilities and Inspection team. They focus on capturing vital information on the assets and facilities owned by the reserve. And this team chose Field Apps for its combination of both map and form view of data that can enable users to see that current and historic information. And finally, we have the Biodiversity team. This team is focused on ensuring that any development of new hiking paths or new facilities for visitors protects and restores the existing biodiversity. So this team need to see real-time feedback of biodiversity loss and gain when editing. And so, as you might have guessed, Sweet is going to be the biodiversity team's app of choice. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Claudia, who's going to first take you through how the Species Watch team might configure QuickCapture. Over to you.
Thank you. So as Elleni mentioned, the first team we're going to focus on is Species Watch. This team is dedicated to monitoring species numbers and to better understand how they're distributed across our reserve. Carrying out these efforts helps us to protect the species and the habitat in which they reside. Now, the nature of this work requires rapid data collection, capturing the location of the species as accurately and as quickly as possible, so that they can focus on observing the field, particularly as many of these species are quite difficult to spot. And ArcGIS QuickCapture is the fastest way to collect these field observations by simply providing your field workers with this application whereby they can rapidly collect data from a moving vehicle with just the touch of a button. With its simplistic user interface, ArcGIS QuickCapture can help to digitalize and streamline your field workflows and ultimately help to improve productivity. Both its desktop configuration and its mobile application is incredibly intuitive, meaning that no training is required and the app can be implemented almost immediately. For our Species Watch team, we can create an application listing out all the species known to reside within the reserve, whereby we can then rapidly capture their location. So let's go ahead and launch QuickCapture. When launching QuickCapture, you're taken to this projects page, whereby you can start a project from either existing layers or from a template. And when creating a project in QuickCapture, it's going to produce the web map, dashboard, and the project to configure and visualize your data. When creating a project from a template, QuickCapture will also produce that feature layer for all of your data that you're capturing to be fed into. In our case, I've already made a feature layer, and I've listed out all the fields I'm wanting to include, so I can select that. And you'll notice here at the bottom, it's asking if I want to create buttons from layer symbology. In our case, it's going to create buttons for every single species that we've listed out in our feature layer. And doing this, it's made the configuration even simpler. And as you can see, we've got a basic template of our app here. There is still certainly some work to be done, though. Firstly, we need to actually link up what data we want each of these buttons to capture. So if I click on my first one here, black grouse, I head over to the Data tab on the right-hand side. We can see we've got that target feature layer that we specified. Below, QuickCapture has listed all of the fields that we need to capture. And to save my team's time whilst they're out in the field, we can predefine how some of these fields are calculated. For example, we could make use of the device variable, and we could capture its time, as well as the full name of the user of the device, and device location. For species name, we've used fixed value, and I can just make sure that that aligns with the label of my button. This means that my team simply have to open this application and they can instantly start capturing data. It's removing those tedious tasks of having to jot down notes and trying to find your GPS coordinates, all while in our team's case, the team is exposed to the Scottish elements. ArcGIS QuickCapture also allows you to take photos. Once enabled, you will then be prompted to capture an image as soon as that button is pressed. And this is all within the one application and can help support your data. So now we've had a look at how to link our data, let's go into the appearance of this application. With just a few changes, we can better visualize and organize our application to make sure it's as efficient as possible to take into the field. And here we have that same application. Now, to better organize that large number of buttons that we had, we can drop in these group elements, whereby then we can just divide up how we want our buttons to appear. Such as here, we've done it by the habitat in which all of these species reside. To reduce the risk of human error entries, we've also decreased the number of columns in each of these groups, allowing us to increase the size of each of these buttons. Also, to add a visual aid, we've added images to each of these buttons as well by uploading images that we already had available within our organization. Now, when dispatching our field team into such a remote and isolated environment, as a duty of care, it is integral that we have an understanding of their whereabouts, particularly as they could be facing incredibly rough terrain and unpredictable weather. Therefore, if I go to additional settings, we can see we've got location tracking. Now, once enabled, we're then asking the user who's out in the field to share their last known locations and their tracks. Or you can switch one of these off as well, if you wanted to. Now, granted the user authorizes location sharing when they open this app on the device, we then have all this additional information and providing us with that greater security of knowing where our field teams are located. So now that we've built this app, let's have a look at how it actually interacts out in the field. Here we've got two members of our team out in a particular area of Marlodge Estate. With the mobile application in one team's hand and an off-road buggy in the hands of the other, we're ready to capture species locations. As soon as a button is pressed, it's then capturing that species location with a point. You can see here, by having grouped those buttons with that group element that I just showed, it's made it incredibly easy for our team to be able to find the appropriate button and successfully capture that species location. As you also saw in the configuration, we can capture images, such as here, my team are just about to approach a red squirrel perched in the pinewood forest, and we were lucky enough to capture a photo. Of course, it's also integral that such an application is available offline. And you may notice as we're capturing these locations, that top right-hand corner of my application is telling me the number of points we are capturing. Now, this number is fluctuating because as soon as a connection is then available on the device, it's sending those points directly to your feature layer, meaning that teams back in the office can instantly view all of this data, even whilst you're still out in the field. Now, just to wrap up the journey of this data, I wanted to open it in the map viewer, which you can see we've got here. Now, I've already symbolized it by the same images that we did on our application, but what I wanted to focus on was its attribute table. Here you can see, as soon as we have selected a button on our application, QuickCapture has got to work. It's taken the date of record, the species name, collector, location, and any attachments if we did take those photos, just as we configured earlier on. And that really is the strength of this application, to be able to actually allow your field team to focus very little on the app itself, and instead allow you to capture locations, field observations, and even images without interrupting the task at hand. So now that Species Watch team are fully equipped to venture into the field, we're going to move on to our next team, who, as Elleni did mention, aren't actually workers at Marlodge Estate, but instead they're regular visitors. And it's as important to those regular visitors as it is to us that our reserve and its hiking trails are kept in as good a condition as possible. Therefore, we're going to be equipping these regular visitors with a form-based application using Survey123, whereby they can capture the details of hazards along hiking trails, such as fallen trees, rubbish, or landslips. By encouraging the public's involvement like this, it can save up valuable time from my field team, who are typically having to carry out these inspections far more frequently, and can even help to improve the overall quality of our trails. So let's open up Survey123, And as you can see here, we've already started to piece together a survey with some basic questions such as their reason for visiting today, the type of hazard they're reporting, as well as its location and image and the date. You'll also notice that most of these questions are using a different format. And this is to provide the most easiest and the quickest way to be able to capture all of the details of this hazard. Creating a survey within this application is incredibly easy using a basic drag and drop style method. Simply hovering over the question type you're wanting to add to this survey, dragging it into position, and dropping it in. From here, we then have many customizations that can be made. I can add in my question. I can change the maximum values that the hikers can submit to this question, as well as the icon that's appearing if I wanted to. Below you can see we've got this validation section. Now here we can set required questions, whereby all of which must be answered before this survey can even be submitted. This can make sure that we're capturing the most important data from this survey and also provide you with a more complete data set. So now that we've built this survey, I'm wanting to have a message that thanks them for their time and efforts in filling this out, since they are on their adventure after all. So under the Options tab, you can see we've done just that. We've added a message that will appear as soon as they've submitted to thank them for their time. So let's have a look and see how our survey is looking. In the Preview tab, we can have a look at our survey in mobile, desktop, and tablet format. This can make sure that no matter the device that may be used, our survey is visualized and interacting as we expected. In our case, it's likely that our hikers will be using their mobiles. So if we click on the phone template, we can then have a look that we're happy with how our survey is looking and how it's interacting as well. Now, this example really just shows how quick and easy it is to build together a survey like this. But there are many more capabilities of Survey123 if you want to create a more advanced app. For example, we can set rules whereby questions are only going to appear once you interact appropriately with another. Now, in our case, we need to remember that these participants are likely to be hiking out in our reserve, so they're probably not going to have a mobile connection. Under the Collaborate tab, I just want to make sure that this application is going to open in the Survey123 Field app directly, which we can do here. Of course, also they're members of the public. They're out enjoying this reserve, so we want to make sure that everyone can see and submit to this survey, which we've got just here. So let's go ahead back into the field and see how this app interacts. Here we have one of our helpful hikers who are out in the field and they're with their mobile phone taking a picture of that QR code on one of our posters. As you can see, that's opened directly in the Survey123 Field app, just as we configured. They've already started filling out the survey with all the different question formats, making it incredibly easy to capture all of these details and taking very little time away from their adventure. Now, you're also going to notice here that they're actually missing that required question at the bottom. They're going to miss that question and try and submit, then prompting them that they must submit this question. When we submit these surveys without a connection, it's going to save it in the outbox. As soon as that device then has a connection, all those submitted forms will be sent directly to your ArcGIS system. This means that teams back in the office can instantly view all of this data coming in and can begin to monitor and analyze it in the Analyze tab of Survey123 Desktop. This can help Marlodge Estate to analyze in real time and help to support decision-making, acting upon those hazards that are being reported by our helpful hikers. I'm now going to hand over to Richard, who's going to introduce the last two field teams.
Thank you, Claudia. So the facilities and inspections team at our nature reserve work by navigating across the site to different assets that they own, assessing their condition, and then recording all this information in forms. So that's why they benefit from the use of a more map-centric solution like ArcGIS Field Maps. Field Maps allows the team to complete all of their different tasks in just one single mobile application, which eliminates the need for them to carry around lots of different paper forms as they work. Even when in offline areas, they can capture data accurately, and then as soon as a connection is restored, the auto-sync function will send their new data and edits back to the map in head office. So let's take a look at how we configure field maps for optimal use in the field in this way. Here we have the Field Maps web app, where I've selected the web map from which I want to capture data. It's crucial that our teams can work seamlessly in an offline environment, and so by going to the Offline tab, we can make sure of this by checking that offline mode is enabled. We can also prepare a downloadable offline map area, which our users can use in their mobile app to collect data as normal without an internet connection. It's worth noting that you can use your own base map for these offline map areas, and also schedule updates to take place as regularly as daily, depending on your team's needs. In the app settings, we can further configure our app for optimal use in the field by doing little things like increasing the required location accuracy to just 1 meter, or enabling the ability to not only copy features, but copy their attributes as well, which will save us time as we record multiple identical features in the field. I also want to draw your attention here to the option again for location tracking or location sharing, which when turned on will give the user of the app the option to share their location in real time with those back in head office, maybe for health and safety purposes if working in adverse weather. And I'll save the settings as we go. In the Content tab is where we configure the layers against which we want to capture data. Field maps uses smart forms to capture data, with the fields in the form matching the fields in your layers. So if I want to record information about structures, but specifically the types of structures, I need to grab that from the field list and pull it into place on the form. I can further customize how the field appears in the form by going to Manage List, for example, and making sure that the full list of structure types are present, which will just make collecting that information more efficient for my users in the field. So it's not just layers that we can capture data against in field maps, but also related tables, like this example here, where we save all of the information regarding the inspection of different drainage inlets across the site. We're using field maps to try and be as efficient as possible, and one way we can do that is by using calculated expressions to autofill some of our fields. I've set one up here in the inspector field, for example, and it's just a simple arcade script that will make sure that our ArcGIS online username is automatically completed in the inspector field for us, which will give the user one less thing to think about as they complete their work in the field. Another way we can save time for our users is to only present them with the fields that are relevant to the work that they're carrying out. I have a whole group of fields here related to the condition of various elements of an inlet. But all of these sort of sub-conditions here are only really relevant if this overall condition field is judged to be less than excellent. So if I select one of the sub-conditions, I can set a new conditional visibility expression. And what this means is that the field will only appear if the overall condition field is not excellent. I can rename the expression and hit save. And once I've saved that expression, I can very quickly select the other fields to which it should apply and then just tick on the same expression so they all have the same conditions. And once I save the form, we're ready to take it out into the field. So here is my mobile app, looking at field maps and with no internet connection as if I was truly out in the field. By selecting my profile in the top right-hand corner, I can look at all the various settings on my mobile app and make sure that the auto-sync function is enabled, which, when a connection is restored, will make sure that all my new data and edits are sent back to head office for them to see. I can open my pre-downloaded offline map area and immediately begin to start capturing data based on my device's location. Now, this might take the form of a polygon, like a water body, which I can start to draw on the map, point by point, tracing out the shape as I see it in the field. And once I'm happy, I can save that new water body on the map. I can also capture point data again, based on my device's location, which might take the form of a structure on this occasion. As I go and record that point, I can look at the type field and see the full list of options we configured online, which makes my job more efficient as I want to capture a new billboard. I have the option to take a photo here in the field and attach that to the feature, or attach a file from my existing device storage, like this image of a billboard that was taken earlier, and again save this new point on the map. Now, I don't have to rely on my device's location. I can actually freely pan and zoom to anywhere on the map and capture data at that point. For example, I can pick the solar panel on a roof, and using the copy function that we configured online, I can add a new solar panel adjacent on the roof with the exact same symbology. And because we've copied the features across as well, that type field is already filled out for me. So I've saved time in capturing that new field without filling out the form, and also I've not had to climb all the way up onto the roof to capture the location. So the last task that our field workers need to complete in the field is to inspect the inlets themselves. And by selecting one of these drainage inlets on the map, I can scroll down to the related table and view a report from the last inspection that occurred a few weeks ago. I can see all of this information and understand the context of what was observed last time, meaning I don't need to send the same individual worker to complete this inspection every time. Instead, I now understand it and I'm ready to capture a new report for today's inspection. As I do so, you'll hopefully notice that the inspector field is already filled out with my online username, so that's one thing I don't have to worry about. And then as we scroll down, we have the condition group, which has all of the different fields related to the elements of the inlet. As I set the overall condition to excellent, the other fields disappear as they're no longer relevant to me, and I don't need to spend time reading them and deciding if I need to fill them out. But if I set the overall condition back to very poor, they reappear because they are now relevant, and I can quickly fill them out and complete all of the fields relevant to my work and all of the information that I need. I can then save this report so it's stored alongside the historic report, ready for the next inspection whenever that may be. Now you may notice that once your internet connection becomes restored, you can sync that information back up, either by waiting for the auto-sync window to close or by using the force sync button to send your pending edits back to head office for them to observe the work that you've carried out. So using field maps, the facilities and inspection team have been able to improve their efficiency when working in offline areas across the nature reserve, continually catching highly accurate data, and doing so thanks to these new streamlined workflows. But turning our attention to another team at the nature reserve, the Marlodge Biodiversity team face different problems as they have to adhere to important rules like biodiversity net gain when carrying out their work. Biodiversity net gain is the approach to development that dictates that biodiversity must be left in a measurably better state than before any development took place. The biodiversity team can make sure of this as they analyze the potential impact of new hiking trails through protected habitats, thanks to their choice of field app Sweet for ArcGIS. Sweet makes sure that all of the important rules that they need to follow are followed, so users are confident that their edits are valid, and also provides dynamic feedback so users can assess the potential impacts of their changes before they make any commitments or decisions. So let's again take a look at how we configure Sweet for use in this way. Here we have the wireframe editor for a Sweet application, with the app interface shown here on the right and various settings shown on the left. Just like widgets in some of our other app builders, we can expand on the functionality of our app by adding panels down the left-hand side of the interface. And some of these might look familiar to you, like a layer list or a base map gallery. We have some basic tools at the top, like the option to pan around the map or select features on the map, and also a create tool. And when we select that tool, we get a new list of settings on the left. One of these is the option to add feature templates, which will categorize our layers when we create new tools, and also allow us to set some default field values, which will save me a little bit of time as I capture these new features time and time again. We also have the data rules editor side of a Sweet app, where we can start to build smart editing rules and logic into the functionality of our app. This includes topology rules, where I can control how the features within a layer are allowed to interact and behave, such as can they contain holes or can they overlap each other. And also multi-layer rules, where layers interact, like this example that shows replanting zones and green spaces are not allowed to overlap. So how do these rules actually behave in the app itself? Well, we can test it in the browser before we send our team out into the field. Here's our Sweet app showing just a small section of the nature reserve with existing green spaces and existing hiking trails. Using the Create tool, I can draw in a new area of protected habitat like pinewood forest by freehand just drawing in the shape and saving that on the map. But we're using Sweet to achieve high levels of accuracy and follow all of our important rules. Maybe now I want to add an area of heather protected habitat to this northern corner as well, but our rules state that perhaps we have to stay 50 meters away from any existing trails. Well, that's easy to do by turning on the snapping tool and setting an offset down here in the bottom to 50 meters. I can now do exactly that quickly and confidently. Hopefully you'll notice that my cursor snaps to the trail. As I trace along the line, the pink line emerges, which is where my heather habitat will actually draw. So Sweet's applying that 50-meter offset and making sure that that rule is followed, and I don't have to worry about checking it at any time. Now, I don't want to overlap this area of pinewood forest, but again, we set a topology rule that doesn't allow that. One less thing for me to think about, I can actually just draw a square instead of tracing around the shape. And when I save it, Sweet does the hard work for me, reshaping this new area of heather habitat to obey our rules, achieve a 50-meter offset, and prevent an overlap. So this has been really quick and useful for adding new areas of habitat. But what about our plans to improve access to the western side by adding a new trail through this area of protected habitat? How can we follow our first rule by having that 50-meter gap between the trail and the habitat, and also avoid a huge loss of biodiversity? Well, by going back into the app builder, I'll show you how we've configured for this. In the Data tab, I can select the hiking trails layer and show you that we've created a trigger. And what this means is that one of our layers, called threatened land, will have a new row of data inserted when certain conditions are met. And those conditions are dictated by this script. The script makes sure that all of our rules are followed at all times. So when a new trail intersects green spaces, a buffer of 50 meters will automatically be drawn for us and added to that threatened land layer. And then the area of lost protected habitat will automatically be calculated for us. I can then, back in the wireframe editor, add a custom panel, which we've called Biodiversity Net Gain, to see the status of biodiversity at all times. So let's again test these features in the browser before we go out into the field. Using the Create tool, I can add, on this occasion, a proposed hiking trail. And as I draw it through this area of protected habitat, we see our trigger activate and the buffer automatically drawn for us. So that's our first rule achieved, and we stay 50 meters away from that trail when we add it in. When I open the Biodiversity Net Gain panel, we get some instant dynamic feedback through the form of a warning message that tells us we're now in a state of biodiversity loss, and the bar chart that shows us the exact area that we now need to account for. So now I know what I need to do. I can go into the Create tool, this time find a replanting zone thanks to those feature templates, and pick Pinewood Regeneration Zone. As I draw a small zone into this free bottom corner, we receive, let's draw that one again. We receive some more instant dynamic feedback, showing us now this area of replanting zone on the bar chart. I can see it's not enough to offset our biodiversity loss, so we're still not in a state of biodiversity net gain. So I can use the Reshape tool to grab any corner of this new space and increase its size. And as I do so, I receive more constant dynamic feedback, so I can continue to reshape the replanting zone and increase its size until I'm confident that not only are we in a state of biodiversity net gain, but a sizable one at that. So now we've tested our app in the browser and we're confident that it has the features we need, we can configure the Sweet application for use on a tablet so the team can take it out into the field and into offline areas, and the biodiversity team can be in the environment that they're discussing as they make the edits on the app. Thanks to Sweet's combination of smart editing tools, easy to configure rules, and instant dynamic feedback, the biodiversity team can be confident that whenever they need to account for a new development, they can make the best decisions for biodiversity at all times. Back to you, Elleni.
So we've learned how to configure the key ArcGIS field applications for working efficiently in the field. But what we've also seen is how we can adapt those field apps for different use cases and make them really efficient for the people that are going to use them out in the field. And one of the many great things about these field apps is even after deployment, you can still configure them. That means that you can remain agile, and if your users ask, we want an extra button here, or we want this field to auto-populate, you can do that at a touch of a button and remain very, very efficient. So one last thing to remember before we close this session is all data that's collected, no matter which field app was used, comes back to your central web GIS, so ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise. So that might be bringing all of that field data together into a single app, like a dashboard, for example, to review and monitor the progress of your field teams as they carry out their work. And for our nature reserve dashboard, this means that I can count endangered species at a glance, ensure our reserve is championing biodiversity gain, check inspections of facility assets are in compliance, and also know when to respond to hiking hazards, all in one place. Thank you.